Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Our movie today begins with a girl named Corte, who is driving a car with her younger sister sitting beside her. While they're driving, Corte receives a message on her phone, and she starts reading it, getting distracted from the road. This causes her to lose control of the car, and it crashes into the sea. Corte manages to get out of the car, but unfortunately, the car sinks with her sister inside. Her sister, unable to save herself, is lost, and Corte couldn't save her either. A year later, we see Corte training in the hospital after enrolling in medical school. One day, Corte oversees a patient whose heart stops for a few minutes, but she comes back to life. Because of this, Corte asks the patient what she experienced or felt during that period of temporary death. Corte is shocked when the patient asks her if she had a loved one who had passed away, mentioning that she saw the ghost of a dead girl near her. This conversation leaves Corte feeling mentally exhausted. After finishing her training, Corte goes to the library to research temporary death and what happens to a person during that time. However, she's interrupted when she hears her friend Sophia crying because of the pressure from schoolwork and exams. Sophia tells her that she's afraid of failing because her mother is very strict and might punish her. Corte tries to calm her down and suggests she join her in a medical research project she's working on. Corte believes this will help reduce her stress and give them more time to spend together. The next day, Corte and Sophia meet up with their other friends, Jimmy, Roy, and Marlo. As they discuss the cases they're working on, none of them answers the doctor's questions. When it's Marlo's turn, Roy quickly answers for her before she even has a chance to think, which makes Marlo very upset. It's clear that there's a fierce competition between them in their studies. During lunch break, Corte talks to Jimmy and tells him that she wants to meet him after training in the hospital's ground floor. That evening, Corte meets with Sophia and takes her to the ground floor, which is fully equipped with emergency equipment. Sophia wonders why they are meeting there, and Corte tells her she's researching temporary death and what happens to people after their hearts stop. At that moment, Jimmy arrives, and Corte explains her plan. She mentions that she noticed strange changes in CT scans of the brains of people who came back from death. To understand what happens to them, she decided to try the experiment on herself by stopping her heart for a minute. Sophia hesitates at first, but Corte insists on going through with it, saying that their discovery could make them among the most famous doctors in the world. Jimmy agrees with her idea and decides to help, which leads Sophia to also agree to assist. Corte explains the steps they'll take to stop her heart, and then revive her. She reassures them that she signed a waiver taking responsibility for whatever happens to protect them in case the experiment fails. Corte starts the experiment with Jimmy's help, who assists her in stopping her heart. When her heart stops, Corte feels as though she's freed from her body and begins floating above the city. At the same time, Sophia and Jimmy were counting the seconds, but after the minute passed, they struggled to revive Corte. They couldn't bring her back to life, which increased their panic. At that moment, Sophia asked Roy for help because he was the most skilled among them. Roy immediately rushed to the ground floor, figuring out what was going on. Just in the nick of time, Roy managed to revive Corte before it was too late. At that moment, everyone was shocked to find Marlo behind them, as she had followed Roy after seeing him run out in a panic. Afterward, they all went to Corte's house, where she began to tell them what she experienced during her heart stoppage. She explained that it felt like she was flying above the city and that she could see the hospital's rooftop, even though she had never been up there before. Then, Roy told them that what happened was incredibly dangerous, and that they shouldn't repeat the experiment. The next day, Corte went to the hospital, bringing some bread she had baked herself. She told them that she had remembered her grandmother's bread recipe, so she decided to try it. That day, Corte answered every question the doctor asked, and everyone was stunned by the sudden change in her. In the evening, they all went out together, and Corte played the piano at the restaurant, something she hadn't done in 12 years. At that point, they realized that the experiment had caused this change by stimulating her brain cells and bringing back old memories. At that moment, Jimmy decided he would go through the same experiment and stop his heart, but Roy refused to join them. Roy was just a student from a modest background, and if anything went wrong, he wouldn't have a second chance, unlike his wealthier classmates who could use their influence to get back into the program. The next day, they were surprised when Roy showed up, worried about Jimmy and wanting to be there in case the experiment failed. Jimmy went ahead with it, and during the experience, he found himself riding a motorcycle with a beautiful girl through the city streets. He was happy and enjoying it until he suddenly found himself in an old, deserted street, which made him feel very anxious. Eventually, Jimmy woke up after his friends revived him. That evening, they all went to Cortez' house and celebrated together. Then, Marlo decided she would be the next one to undergo the experiment, but she challenged herself by asking them to stop her heart for 3 minutes, meaning they would only have 1 minute to save her. The next day, there was a major improvement in Jimmy's performance during training. He was now able to treat patients and make the right decisions for their benefit. On the other hand, Cortez continued to focus on the past and her old memories, while Jimmy was fully focused on the present after the experiment. In the evening, they all gathered in the ground floor, except for Sophia, who was forced by her mother to stay home and study because the exams were approaching. The experiment began with Marlo, and during it, she saw different stages of her life, including her achievements and milestones. At that moment, and afterward, she sees herself standing with a patient in the hospital, and the patient dies on the bed in an abandoned hospital. During this time, Roy is trying to revive her heart, but he's extremely anxious until Jimmy helps him, and they manage to bring Marlo back to life. Afterward, they take her and go up to the rooftop because the security's arrival is near. However, at that moment, they are surprised by Sophia, who has managed to escape from her mother and come to them. She tells them that she wants to undergo the experiment right now. He tells her it will be very difficult because security is getting close to searching the ground floor, but Sophia is determined in her decision. They have no choice but to agree. They then return to the ground floor, and the experiment begins on Sophia. At that moment, she remembers her memories from high school and recalls the girl she used to envy because she was always smarter than her. This leads her to hack her phone and send pictures of her to all the students at school to get revenge. At that moment, the security arrives to search the ground floor, and they rush to finish quickly to escape before getting caught. Jimmy helps them by activating the alarm, and they manage to escape in the car before the security arrives. The whole group then goes to a big party to celebrate their achievements and the new life they are about to have, but during the party, Cortez sees the ghost of her dead sister. This makes her remember her sister and that she was the cause of her death, and she breaks down in tears. At the same time, Jimmy returns to the yacht where he lives. He imagines the same girl he saw sleeping in his bed, crying. Then he hears a small child crying, and suddenly everything disappears again. Jimmy hears a phone call from Cortez, telling him that they need to meet because she is seeing strange hallucinations and is scared of them. Jimmy tells her he'll come right away to understand what's going on. Meanwhile, Cortez records a video for her friends, apologizing for hiding the truth from them, which is that she's seeing hallucinations of her dead sister. Suddenly, Cortez hears a sound from the bedroom. When she enters, she finds her sister lying on the desk, burning papers. Cortez runs to escape from her, but her sister chases her, forcing Cortez out of the apartment. She goes to seek help from anyone, but her sister keeps chasing her until she falls down the stairs to the ground, dying instantly. When Jimmy arrives at Cortez' house and rings the doorbell, he gets no response, so he tries again and again before deciding to leave. Meanwhile, Roy has taken Marlo back to her house. Marlo tells him that she needs to talk urgently and admits to him that she killed someone. She tells him that one day, she made a catastrophic medical error, which caused a patient named Cyrus to die, even though his injury was minor. Roy tries to calm her down, telling her that she's not a killer and that what happened was just an accident. At that moment, Roy confesses that he has feelings for her, and to his surprise, Marlo reveals that she feels the same way. The next day, everyone is shocked when they hear about Cortez' death. They realize it wasn't natural, as she was found dead after falling down the stairs. The group gathers and discusses what happened to Cortez, all still in disbelief. Jimmy tells them that Corte had been seeing hallucinations and had asked to meet him. He decides to go to her house to look for any evidence that might help them understand what happened. Jimmy goes to Corte's house, opens it up, and finds that her phone is missing. So, he asks Marlo to go into the morgue to search for it and take it to hide any evidence related to the experiment they did. Marlo agrees, takes the phone, and before leaving, she sees Corte one last time. She gets shocked when she sees her dead body. At that moment, Marlo realizes the truth when she sees the word killer written on the morgue wall. Suddenly, the electricity cuts out, and all the morgue refrigerators open. Then, out of nowhere, Cyrus appears behind them, making Marlo panic. At the same time, Jimmy hears the sound of a small child coming from the radio on the yacht. No matter how hard he tries to stop the noise, he fails. Eventually, he cuts the radio wires, completely disconnecting it. At that moment, Jimmy sees the same girl he's been imagining. This time, he gets scared and runs outside the yacht. But suddenly, he loses his balance and falls into the water. When he tries to climb back onto the yacht, he finds the same girl standing in front of him, and she stabs him with a knife in her hand. The next day, everyone gathers, and Marlo shows a video of Corte. At that moment, she reaches out from the past, chasing him and making him feel guilty. This is why everyone decides to admit the wrongs they've done. Jimmy starts by saying that he loved a girl and was involved with her, but one day he discovered she was pregnant. He promised her he would pay for the abortion. However, on the day of the procedure, he decided to abandon her and leave her alone. That's what made him always imagine the girl and hear the sound of crying children. After that, Sophia talks about what she did to her classmate in high school and how, because of her, the girl had to transfer to another school. As for Marlo, she doesn't talk about the mistake she made. That's why Royal goes to her and tells her that he saw Cyrus's file and discovered it had been altered, and the medical error she made isn't even in his file. She admits she altered the report because she was afraid for her future. Royal then tells her that she has to go and confess to the principal, but Marlo refuses. At the same time, Sophia starts to imagine that her classmate is sending her threatening messages, which makes her feel nervous and leave the lecture. When she gets into the elevator, she discovers it's broken. Just before she exits, the elevator starts working and takes her to an abandoned classroom. Suddenly, her classmate appears in front of her, and Sophia screams. Then she wakes up from her hallucinations. But she decides she has to put an end to everything happening, so she asks Jimmy to go with her on an urgent errand. Sophia goes to her classmate's company and meets her. At that moment, she admits that she's the one who exposed her and sent her pictures to the whole school. Sophia begs her to forgive her, saying she can't live with the guilt. Her classmate forgives her for what she did because it's been such a long time. Jimmy decides to follow Sophia's example, so he goes to his ex-girlfriend and discovers she has a child. He finds out she never had an abortion, and now she's raising their child on her own. Jimmy apologizes to her for being cruel to her and asks for her forgiveness. He promises he will make up for everything that happened. She forgives him right away. As for Marlo, she's still seeing Cyrus, and each time the situation gets worse until she decides to put an end to what's happening to her. So, she sends a message to Royal and apologizes for what she's about to do. Royal and their friends rush to the ground floor to stop Marlo from going through with her plan, but sadly, they arrive too late. They find Marlo has already performed the experiment on herself again, and this time, she stops her heart in an attempt to die. They rush to save her, and at that moment, Marlo sees herself in an abandoned hospital. Suddenly, the mirrors break, and she gets cut. A hidden force controls her, pulling her underwater. But Marlo fights back. Then, a black hole suddenly appears, sucking everything in the room. At that moment, Corte appears and tells Marlo she has to forgive herself. Then, Marlo wakes up after Royal and Jimmy manage to save her just in time. But after what happened, Marlo decides to change her life and take Corte's advice to forgive herself. She goes to the dean and confesses to tampering with Cyrus's file. Although she stops studying and working for a while, she feels relieved after what she's done. Later, She goes with Royal and they sink Cortay's laptop in the sea to erase any evidence or memories of the experiment that almost destroyed their lives. That same day, the group gathers in their usual spot, but this time without Cortay, who, despite her death, is still remembered by her friends, and they cherish all their memories with her. And with that, the events of our film today come to an end. I hope you enjoyed it with us. Don't forget, if you liked the video, please support us with a like and subscribe.